Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with Nicola. Welcome to the channel, Nicola.
Hi, how are you, Hunter? Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I'm doing great. So, would you like to put any plugs in here real quick, just so people know where to find you, where to find your products?
Absolutely. So I could be found at enchantressofforbiddenknowledge.com.
Excellent. Sounds good. So, we were talking earlier about your early path and kind of how everything clarified for you eventually, and how you found your various practices now and your various working belief systems. So, how would you like to start off with talking about your path and how you just got into where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I could say is that I actually started my path as a witch by starting with astrology. I had had all of these things about myself, these personality traits that seemed to be things that I didn't quite understand. Several years ago, I actually ended up Googling some of my personality traits. And along with the more popular personality trait type tests, like I don't know if your audience has heard of like the Myers-Briggs and things like that. I had been familiar with those kind of things, but they didn't really give me the answer that I was looking for. I wanted something a little bit more in depth for I guess perhaps more of a spiritual background. So I landed into astrology. I'm also an astrologer for several years, and it was from learning about astrology and zodiacs and natal charts. From there I started to learn about myself. So it came from a place of self-healing, wanted to understand my traits and understanding that my traits were neither good or evil or sometimes we use the terms positive and negative, but we just have personality traits. So from there I learned how to use my personality traits, which we all have. And in learning those traits and understanding my natal chart from all of the houses and all of the planets and the asteroids and so forth, I learned a lot about myself. And then I started digging a little bit deeper. I actually began as a light worker, healing. And I had initiated with a mystery school under Solomon and so forth. And I had done that for a few years. But since birth, I had had these gifts, spiritual gifts. And what I noticed when I initiated as a light worker, a lot of those gifts for me had, instead of increase and helped me along the way, what I found was they started to disappear. I was no longer in touch with myself intuitively. So that became an issue. But the more I dug into magic, I realized that there was so much more that I could do with magic. And I wanted to be just blunt about it. I wanted more power. I wanted power to be able to create the life that I wanted. And somewhere down the line, about a decade ago, I ended up initiating with Lucifer. And I work a lot with the Infernal Empire, but I also work with the Egyptian pantheon and quite a number of spirits and practices. So I don't work with just one particular practice or pantheon. I just do magic. I'm a black magician. So yeah, I this is pretty much how I started my path, and now a decade later, what I do particularly is I specialize in Pharmakia, which is a practice of using poison potions, which I create from herbals. I actually grow a lot of the herbs myself. I use some poisonous plants such as mandrake. That's one of my favorite plant to work with. I actually grow my own mandrake, but I also use herbs that grow in my backyard very naturally from the spirits. So I use a lot of these in the potions that I create, and I do sell these potions on my website. And I use these potions to do a number of things in magic, anything from love to wealth and abundance to protection.
So do you often work with a number of another number of beings when you're making these potions or you're making talismans? Do you work with a number of beings? I know a lot of, and also I know a lot of people don't know exactly what the Infernal Empire is. Perhaps you can give that the best definition that we can, because so that people kind of understand what that is. Because a lot of people know about Anubis and Set, Isis, Osiris, but the Infernal Empire it's referred to by many, but there's not a whole lot of like definition a lot of the time. Is there a way that you can describe that and maybe the potions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if I will give such a great definition of it, but for me, the Infernal Empire starts with Lucifer. So, for those of us who work, or was initiated or took some type of initiation, and I'm talking about a self-initiation. I didn't go to pay someone or anything like that. It was pretty much a calling on the spirit Lucifer. And in this case, the spirit Lucifer has different facets or different personalities or different faces, depending on how you look at it. So I called on the light bearer, Lucifer, and I pretty much told the spirit Lucifer that I wanted to be able to help myself. I wanted to transform myself into a person that I would be happy with, and a person that would be self-healing and also be able to heal others and radiate just a very positive experience for myself and those around me and my loved ones. So I pretty much what some people called did a pact with Lucifer. And I told the spirit that if the spirit were to guide me as a mentor and a teacher and teach me not only about myself, but about black magic and about the infernal, that I would be dedicated to the path no matter what. So for me, when we talk about the infernal empire, we're talking about Lucifer, Lilith, Nama, Satan, and just a variety of spirits. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But some of these spirits, from working with them, I've actually learned that many of them are the same in the Egyptian pantheon, but they're known by different names depending on the pantheon or the culture that you're working with. So I hope that gives a better understanding. And I guess the last thing I would add to that is, it would be a different realm, if we're talking spiritually, and many people do believe that the infernal empire has to do with what most people consider hell. So, or Tartarus, and there's many names for hell, but that's the easiest definition to give.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. So a lot of the potions that you make, what are some of the things that they do? And you mentioned the word poison. Is word poison always baneful, or is it used in other regards, or is that a name that can cover a number of things that these kinds of potions do, or even talismans?
Yes. So what you've mentioned is actually correct. My potions are poisonous because we are not supposed to ingest them or put them on your skin per se. But I do make potions that are safe to put on the skin. But no matter what the potions are for, they are considered poisonous, unless specified that they're not. And I use poisonous herbs. I use herbs that if you were to indigest them or put them on the skin, they probably would irritate the skin or can actually cause death. These, if you look at our medical industry, a lot of the medications that the pharmaceutical companies give, they're actually poisons themselves. But in the right dosage, you can take them technically and either heal or help any type of ailment that the human body has. So, herbs do the same thing. It's kind of a naturopath kind of way of looking at it. So this is pretty much what I'm doing. I'm pretty much making medicines that can do a variety of things. They can be used in love magic. They can be used in healing magic. They can be used for protection. Every herb or every plant on the face of the earth is actually tied to a spirit, sometimes multiple spirits. And each herb can be tied to a part of the body, from the mind, the heart, all of the chakras, and from the top of our head to our toes. There are herbs that are directly related to different parts of the body. Another one of the herbs that I use is something called dragon's blood. Some people may use it as incense. I think that's one of the more popular way to use it as incense. But if you have a very pure form of it, you can actually digest it. And it's actually very good for anything in the digestive tract. It's not poison when it's in its pure form. So I use a lot of dragon blood in my potions, and I also take it as a supplement as well. Mandrake is also similar to that. Mandrake could be illegal depending on what part of the country you are or what country you are in, but in the right dosage, I'm not by any means telling the audience or anyone to take mandrake because it's very poisonous and it can cause harm and death. But if you work with the spirits and you have somewhat of a scientific background, which I have, mandrake can be taken in very low dosages and it has a lot of healing properties. But I also use the plant in the potions that I make as well.
So it sounds like just like spirits. Well, there's a patron spirit for all these things. Plus, I also believe that every plant has its own innate spirit. It might have an overarching spirit that kind of like rules over it, kind of like a grandfather or grandmother spirit, kind of like some Native Americans believe. So it sounds like when you say poisonous, it's just if you take in the wrong doses or if you ingest it. But it sounds like it has magical capabilities. A lot of these plants and herbs have magical capabilities that are kind of beyond the poison if you use it correctly. Poisonous if you do it incorrectly, but if you do it correctly, there's overarching a number of spiritual benefits. So do you create some potions and some talismans for protection? And do you create more talismans and potions tied to spirits that are infernal or Egyptian, or do you view them as the same thing? I guess I'm asking for a couple examples, and maybe a potion tied to Lucifer or something like that.
Absolutely. So I do have a potion. I'll talk about two of them. I have one called the Avenging Sword of Satan potion, and it's for protection, but it can also be used in any kind of rite. It's for protection not only of your home, of your being, but for things like your finances. I find that finances is one thing that people I've come across and clients that I've come across we don't really think about protecting our finances. We think about protection. We kind of think about the mundane things. But yes, I've created a magical potion, which I drew on the energy of Satan. That is for protection. And I also do sex magic. So I also have a oil called Ecstasy Sex Magic Oil. This one can be placed on the skin. So it can be used in sex magic. It could be used to place on a talisman, but it can also be used for massaging the body. And it can also be used for those who work with succubi or incubus. And in those kind of displays. So yes, those are two of my more popular potions that I create.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned succubi and incubi. So would you consider these infernal spirits? And how does one work with them the same way that you would call on spirits from other realms, or do you feel like they're present spirits in this one? What would your description of succubi and incubi be, and like why would somebody really want to work with them? What would be the purpose? What would be the result that you're seeking from these various beings?
That's a very good question, Hunter. There's a long version and there's a short version. I know for the essence of time, we can't really get into much detail. But, incubus and succubi are one of the type of deities that don't necessarily work like an Egyptian pantheon deity like Osiris or something like that, or Isis. It works very differently. You don't have to be a magician or a sorcerer to work with an incubus or a succubi. These are spirits that are drawn to sexual energy. So the very first encounter I personally had with an incubus was when I was a Catholic and I didn't practice any type of witchcraft. These spirits can actually attack humans and against their will have sexual relationships with them. I mean, just to be quite honest, that was my first experience. But the reason why someone who's a practicing sorcerer would want to work with an incubus is because they're also a type of servitor. So if you know what you're doing, you can work with a higher spirit or a spirit that rules the incubi, and you can ask for this incubus or succubi to work for you. So the proper way would be, in my opinion, as a servitor. But some people also would like to work with an incubus or a succubi for sexual reasons. It's kind of like a mistress or a lover. Some people do it in this aspect. I myself don't look at it that way. It's actually very dangerous to do it that way because succubus are like vampires. They suck our energy. So it's best to you work with a succubi or incubus that we are well aware of and we develop a relationship. But for most part, the best way to work with these type of deities would be as a servitor.
That makes sense. So I've created some servitors myself, but none of this particular nature. So when you use them as a servitor, would you bind a succubi or an incubi to a talisman, or would there be a physical object, or would it be, or would you tie it to some kind of mantra or thought pattern? Would you tie it to something? And if you do, how do you work with servitors personally? I guess we can also get into a little bit.
So for me, I work with an incubi so that it can guide me in certain type of sex magic. So as a guide, kind of this kind of not as popular, but there's people call sex therapists. If you've ever heard of that, sometimes couples or individual will go to sex therapists. It's definitely a type of therapist. So you can use an incubi or succubus as a sex therapist. But I also use an incubus for protection. So they have a variety of powers that they can imbue on the sorcerer, depending on what you're trying to do. So personally, I work with a particular incubus that helps me in protecting me while I'm doing certain types of rites and rituals. So for protection, also as a sex therapist in a way when I'm doing some types of sex magic.
So if you relate to these beings properly, then they can be beneficial. It sounds like it's just key not letting them abuse their power over you, or not letting them have power over you, and making sure that you're in control the whole time. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. They work very different than the spirits. If you just call on one and you want one to be around you, they're not the kind of deities that would necessarily respect your boundaries. It's in my experience, I found it to be best when you ask a spirit that it rules over the incubus to assign one to you for a particular cause. And then once that happens, you kind of have a contract with that incubus saying that, in this contract, I'm pretty much working with you to have these things done. And if not, then it's null and void. So yes, you definitely want to have some control over any type of servitor or any type of spirit that is going to be working with you or around you in that capacity.
Do you bind servitors to various objects, or is this something that you call upon them based on name purely, or how do you relate to them personally? Do you use parchment? How do you do this practice? Just basically, you don't have to go into detail or anything like that. But.
Yeah. So if I keeps going off of the example of sex magic. So when I create my ecstasy oil, which is a sex magic oil, I will call on the incubus that works with me, and I will actually draw on the energy of this sex deity. And with pulling that energy within myself, I then use that energy in order to create the ecstasy oil. I don't bind the incubus to the oil because you don't really want to, because that energy goes through yourself and then goes into whatever product you do. So I'm not binding it to it. I'm actually binding my own sexual energy to the product that I make. So I personally don't bind servitors or spirits per se to the oils or the products that I make. I use I work with the spirits in order that they help to empower me or give me the information or bless me with powers that I can do the magic on my own. And this is how particularly I work. So no, I don't bind any spirits per se to any of my talisman or the potions that I make. I usually work with spirits as teachers, as mentors, or senseis. I ask them to teach me something. I ask them to give me particular knowledge in exchange for something else. And many times when I do my practice, I will call on those spirits to help guide me. So they're kind of standing there with me saying, okay, you're doing this right, or kind of an encouragement and lending me sometimes their powers while I work through the process.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, I guess that's the time we have for this segment. I want to thank you very much for joining me on this. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me once again.
No problem. Would you like to go ahead and plug your shop one more time?
Yes, please. You can find me at enchantressofforbiddingknowledge.com.
Excellent. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this, everybody. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, as always, shoot them down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from y'all, and I want all of you to have a wonderful day.